It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gon' come. Oh, yes it will. And then I go to my mother. I said, Mother, could you help me, please? Help me, She said, I'd like to, I really would, but I'm just not able. And then I looked around, and I was right back down on my knees. There's been times that I thought I would last for long, but somehow I think I'm able to carry on. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes it will.
Good afternoon and welcome to a special Word Town Hall conversation, COVID-19 and the Black community, why Philly needs a Black stimulus. This is your host for this program, Amadi Braxton, normal host of Solutions on Word every Friday from 5 to 7 p.m., welcoming you. And this special conversation today was brought about and is being sponsored by Council Member at Large Kendra Brooks of the Working Families Party and 215 People's Alliance. And we have a number of great, thoughtful speakers joining us today. You can watch us on Facebook Live at 4Word, that's FORWURD. And in the 3 o'clock hour of this town hall, you can join the conversation by calling in to ask your questions or share your reflections for our final segment at 215-634-8065. That's 215-634-8065, or you can dial 1-866-361-0900. On Instagram, we are at ONWORD, ONWURD, and the same with Twitter. And we look forward to your engagement and comments and participation. So there is a lot happening right now. We are in the midst of a global health pandemic that has been disproportionately impacting Black and Brown communities here. We are facing economically the biggest job loss since the Great Depression, and yet the scourge of police brutality and murder persists, with the most recent in a string of incidents, the killing of George Floyd, which has kind of punctuated the moment. And of course, our city, like many across the country, is engulfed in massive protests, what some might call an uprising, where people are standing up and saying enough. And it's also election day. It's primary election day in Philadelphia today and across the state of Pennsylvania. So there is a lot to talk about, and we have a full, fabulous panel of people to help us break all of this down. I'm going to go through and list all of our speakers here at the top, and then we're going to break it down into small conversations in between our different segments of this program today. So we will be hearing from Kendra Brooks, Council Member at Large for the City of Philadelphia, the first Working Families Party candidate to ever be elected to Philadelphia City Council. We also will be hearing from Keeanga Yamada Taylor. Dr. Taylor is Assistant Professor at Princeton University's African American Studies Department, the author of 3 books, Race for Profit, How Banks and the Real Estate Industry Undermined Black Home Ownership, the book From Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation, and How We Get Free, Black Feminism and the Combahee River Collective. We will also be hearing from Munira Edens, an organizer with One PA or One Pennsylvania, who organizes for workers' rights and is also a parent of 2 school-age boys in Philadelphia. We think her son, Tariq, is going to be joining us as well. We have Jennifer Graham, who is an essential worker living in Philadelphia, who has worked as a health aide and has been impacted by the pandemic. We'll also hear from Dr. Ala Stanford, founder of the COVID-19 Black Doctors Consortium and a pediatric surgeon. We have Rashida Phillips, Senior Advocate Resources and Training Attorney, at the Shriver Center for Poverty Law. She's previously worked at the Community Legal Services in Philadelphia as their managing attorney for landlord-tenant housing unit. We also have Chenjerai Kumanika, scholar, journalist, and activist who works as an assistant professor at Rutgers University's Department of Journalism and Media Studies. He is also on the 215 People's Alliance Steering Committee. We have council member at large Isaiah Thomas, and we also have Maurice Mitchell, currently serving as the national director of the Working Families Party, a grassroots political party that works to elect progressive candidates for office. So we have a full house, and I'd like to first start with council member Brooks, who is one of the people behind this event today, to talk about why you wanted to have this conversation about the pandemic and to share your thoughts about why a Black stimulus. Give us some grounding for this conversation, council member.
Yes, thank you so much, Amadi. And I also want to thank you for moderating this important conversation. And I want to thank WRD for hosting this and for everyone to be joining us right now in this program on Election Day, as well as 215 People's Alliance and the Philadelphia City Council for co-sponsoring this event. But, before we dive in, I want to say that everyone who is listening today, we want this conversation to keep going even after our time ends right now. And if you want to stay connected, we have a link that is bit.ly/BAT and if people can sign the petition, we will get updates on the work that we're doing around fighting for Black stimulus, and the ways for us to be accountable and the ideas that we discuss right now. And we want to engage as many people as possible in this conversation. So, when I think about this, we got to think and kind of memorialize this day, saying that in 1871, Octavius Cato was shot and killed on Election Day here in Philadelphia. He was a civil rights activist, a Black educator, a leader, and an intellectual. He was murdered by white people who opposed Reconstruction and Black suffrage. They attacked him and other Black men to prevent them from voting and for people to come in power. The people who killed him were afraid that Black folks could vote. And then they would be able to compete for jobs that they weren't currently able to get in a neighbor yard. And they murdered him out of fear of losing power. So nearly 150 years later, and we're facing the same issues. We see George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery murdered because of racism, police violence, and systematic disregard of Black lives. We see the federal government threatening military on its own people. You see journalists being arrested, but you also see people who are hungry for change and tired of the status quo. People are tired of racism and oppression. They're tired of being silenced and powerless. So when you say, what is a Black what does it mean? Why do we want this? And we don't have all the answers, but I think this is a good place to start the conversation about what is possible and how can we invest and empower our communities. And that's what this conversation is really about. And that's why I felt it was important for us to bring, folks that I have admired and watched in my movement years around issues that are important to me: housing, education, access to health care. I invited my colleague, Councilmember Thomas, on because he and I we knew each other way before city council, and we know what it's like to fight for our community. So when we think about a Black stimulus, we're just talking about ways to empower and invest in our communities in a way for us to end this deep poverty that we see in the city. The disinvestment in education and an investment in the police state that we're in now. And what does that look like? And until all of us come together across socioeconomic status, I'm talking about Black folk, and have a real conversation about how we can empower and strengthen each other, so the boot that's on our neck, that we aren't perpetuating ourselves. So for me, this Black stimulus conversation is ripe and ready for this day and this moment, in the midst of a global pandemic, in the midst of terrorism that's happening right now, by the police force that I just saw in Center City rushing here from Center City, and the time is now. So let's get this conversation, so we can begin the healing process and the strengthening process together.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Brooks. Yeah, it's a lot happening. I'm, sitting here in West Philly hearing sirens and rushing emergency vehicles, for the past several days. And it's very unnerving to know that there is all of this police activity on top of the stresses that we're all facing in the pandemic as it is. I want to turn to, and thank you for your leadership, by the way, too, I wanted to say, on this issue.
Thank you.
I wanted to turn to Dr. Taylor. Professor Taylor, you've written powerfully about the ways that we're having this convergence of the failure of our health systems to address the health impacts on Black and Brown communities in the pandemic, the economic crisis, the ongoing issues with police brutality, most recently by, the case with George Floyd's murder. Talk about just where we are right now and how you're seeing this convergence happening, and really the failures of these systems that we are told we can rely on. What are you seeing right now in terms of how this failure is manifesting, and your thoughts about where we are?
Sure. Well, first, thanks very much for the invitation to be a part of this very critical discussion right now. I do think that there are a few things that are happening, because the public lynching of George Floyd was obviously something viscerally experienced by not just Black people, but I think people all over this country and people all over the world. But the reality is that the videotapes of police beating, harassing, killing Black people have never stopped since the eruption of Black Lives Matter. And so the question is, why now? And I think that it is the convergence of this outrageous case, but also the outrageous neglect, malfeasance, disregard of all levels of government that has come to light through the crisis of the pandemic. And so not only did the pandemic shine a light and expose the grotesque inequalities that shape American society, but they also showed the gross incompetence of the highest levels of our government in being able to respond. And you see, and in some ways, saying it's incompetent is generous. What we have seen is the systematic defunding of the public sector, the systematic undermining of public health systems. And when you compare the level of equipment, machinery, technology at the hands of police when it comes to attacking demonstrations and protesters, and you compare that to the absolute lack of equipment, lack of technology, lack of preparation for healthcare workers that have been reduced to wearing plastic garbage bags, who have been reduced to wearing the same masks that are supposed to be changed after every interaction with a patient. They are wearing days and weeks at a time. And so it's not that we don't have the resources to deal with these issues, is that our country has chosen to redirect them elsewhere, whether it is to the police, whether it is to the Pentagon, which receives almost $1 trillion a year in funding. And so what this uprising that is unfolding across the country is really reacting to is the ways that the mechanisms that are put in place for us to be able to respond to ineffective government, the mechanisms in place for us to change things when they aren't going correctly don't work. And so when the government has proven itself to be incompetent and ineffective, people still need these things. And so they choose other means to go about addressing and getting them. Where the state has proven itself to be unresponsive to the needs of people, not just over the last year, the last 5 years, the last 10 years, this has been going on for decades. There is no golden age of policing that we can get back to. The Kerner Commission, which came out in the aftermath of the uprisings and rebellions of the 1960s, it was published in 1968. It was a government investigation into why these rebellions continued to happen every year from 1963 to 1968. And the top 3 reasons that people listed were underemployment, poverty as 1, police brutality is 2, and substandard housing is 3. What has changed? 55 years later, what has changed? And so history is not cyclical, it is cumulative. And the reaction and the intensity of the rebellions today are so much more angry because of this systematic failure of the mechanisms of the state to respond to people's ingrained needs. And so that's part of the conversation that we need to have. The last thing I will say is we don't need more elected officials, and thank God for Kendra, and we need more officials like Kendra, but we don't need any more of these people to grandstand in front of the cameras about how sorry they are, about how terrible they feel about these disparities and equities. We need them to do something. We need resources shifted. We don't need nice speeches. We don't need handshakes and kissing babies. We need resources. We need to make sure that if we are sending our children back to public schools in the fall, that there is soap in the building so that they can wash their hands, that there is hot water in the building, that there are paper towels in the building so that they can dry their hands. We need to make sure that there are no longer houses in the city of Philadelphia that are designated unfit for human habitation, but people are still living in them.
Right.
And so less talk, more action. Less talk, more money. That is why people are rebelling in the streets, and that is what we need to be responsive to.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. We are coming up on our first break in about a minute.
I am here. I'm just letting you know I'm here.
Okay,
Hi.
we see you.
We're
Thank
just
you.
in the midst of testing. I didn't want you to think I wasn't here.
No, that's okay. Well, you know what? Let's go to you first. We have about a minute before. Can we go to you just for a
Sure.
brief moment?
Sure. I'll
This
go
is-
outside so you can see what we're doing out here today.
Okay, this is Dr.
Ayla.
Ayla Stanford. Sorry, of the COVID-19 Black Doctors Consortium. Talk to us about why you all came together.
Oh, well, that's easy.
Yes.
We came together because when the Tribune published that article on April 3rd and said that Black folks were dying at a higher rate, I reached out and said, how can I help you guys? How can I help you figure out how to test the folks that are more affected than any other group? And I got crickets. Nobody was doing anything. I know that a lot of my friends were calling and they were saying, I showed up at so-and-so place, but since my doc wasn't on staff, they wouldn't test me. Or they only have these hours and I'm working, so I can't get there. Or they're only taking people in cars and I take public transportation. And there were all these barriers, so people couldn't get tested. And that's how we came together, because there was a need and African Americans were dying at a rate higher than anyone else. And we needed to do something. And I waited. I kept writing letters and emails and conversations with folks, trying to figure out how to get people tested. I wasn't getting anywhere. So I just paused and said, okay, I need testing kits. I need people. I need PPE and people willing to do it. And once I realized we had the key components, we just got it together. You know, we just got it together. And I know I'm making it sound very simple, but there were lots of hoops to jump through. And certainly my ability to have an account with LabCorp, who supplied the supplies, went a long way. And as a private practice doctor, I did not have all the red tape that the different hospitals have. That being said, most of them had testing sites, but people weren't coming. And part of that had to do with the lack of trust or the distrust that they had from many of those institutions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the judgment. And so we were able to break down those barriers with something as simple as a name to begin with, by calling ourselves the Black Doctors COVID-19 Consortium, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so we started with that. And people were initially sort of inquisitive, wondering what it would be like, but then it spread like wildfire, like things spread in the Black community.
Yes.
And a friend told a friend, and because we were in people's neighborhoods, they walked to us. They came out of their front door and walked to where we were being tested, and they'd go home and they'd tell a friend, and then that person would then bring a friend. People rode bikes, you know, we were always on a public transportation line. And so it was wonderful. And, you know, even today, I thought with all the things that have been happening in the city and the fact that the number of cases per day is starting to decrease, that we'd see fewer people. But we've probably already tested 200 people, and we started maybe 11:15.
Wow.
And I suspect it'll be somewhere between 200 and 300 people today. You know, and we always know when we pull up and the parking lot is full before we even unload the van, we know it's going to be a busy day. And the need is so strong. The need is still here. And now we're getting repeat people. We're getting people come here from Norristown Mental Hospital, and they bring their patients here for us to test them.
Wow.
You know?
Wow.
It's like there's no hospital, there's no facility that takes care of these state-run resident homes and things, and there isn't. And so people are calling on us, you know, the private sector, you know, certainly the public, and wherever there is a need is where we're going. Right?
Thank you so much for the work you're doing. Look, we have probably more questions and things we want to talk to you about, but we are up on our first break here. Thank you so much for the work you're doing. We will be right back. You are tuned into a special Word Town Hall conversation, COVID-19 in the Black community, why Philly believes a Black stimulus. We will be right back.
Get your money straight.
Get my money right.
With Solomon Jones and Akbar Hassan.
Fridays on Wake Up with Word.
7 a.m. till 10 a.m. Hosted by Solomon Jones. Exclusively on Word Radio. 96.1 FM and 900 AM WURD.
Streaming live on wordradio.com and on the Word Radio app.
This Black Music Month vignette is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Lottery.
Toni Morrison was an American novelist, essayist, book editor, and college professor who grew up surrounded by music. The influence of her mother's singing, street rhythms, and the Black church are woven throughout her writing. Her most famous books include Song of Solomon, Sula, Jazz, The Bluest Eye, and Beloved. In 1996, she received a Nobel Peace Prize for being a visionary force giving life to an essential aspect of American reality. But Toni Morrison also made a splash in classical music, providing the text for a 6-part song cycle, Honey and Rue, and the opera Margaret Gardner. The opera debuted in 2005 and toured to several cities, including Philadelphia. Word Radio celebrates Toni Morrison for her contributions to Black music and literature.
Ramp up your fun when you play Skee Ball, the new scratch-off and fast play game from the Pennsylvania Lottery. Both with top prizes of $10 grand, as well as second chance drawings. Must be 18 or older. Please play responsibly. Benefits older Pennsylvanians every day.
Warning: if you're drowning in debt you can't afford, do not let the credit card companies trick you into thinking that you have to pay it all back, because you don't. What the credit card companies don't want you to know is that there's actually a way to get debt-free without paying off your entire debt or going bankrupt. If you have $10,000 or more in credit card debt, you now have the right to let us settle that debt for a fraction of what you owe. For a free estimate on how much money we could save you, call 1-800-969-5941. If you can't afford to pay off all your debt, do not let the credit card companies trick you into thinking that you have to. Call Credit Associates now for free information on how to get debt-free faster than you ever thought possible, without debt consolidation or bankruptcy. We depend on your success and offer a guarantee, so there's no risk. For your free 5-minute savings estimate, call now. 1-800-969-5941. That's 1-800-969-5941. 1-800-969-5941.
Word TV. We're streaming live video of this conversation right now.
Tune in on YouTube at On Word
Or on Facebook at Forward.
Word TV.
Black Talk Media.
Welcome back to Word's special town hall conversation on COVID-19 and the Black community, why Philadelphia needs a Black stimulus. We are hearing from, in our first panel here, people who have been working in the front lines of this pandemic. And I would like to shift now to hear from Jennifer Graham, if we can hear from you. You have been one of these essential workers we hear so much about, who are on the front lines. In addition to the doctors and nurses, you are also you have been providing healthcare in the midst of this pandemic. And I'd love to hear your experience as an essential worker and the challenges of the working conditions that you have had to deal with during the pandemic. I understand that you had to make a choice about your own well-being in healthcare and had to leave a job in order to, that was at a home-based facility, in order to make the right decision for yourself and your own well-being. Tell us a little bit about your experience being an essential worker. That everybody's talking about the essential workers, but part of the issue is that we're relying on you so much at the same time as not necessarily recognizing the challenges that you're facing. So tell us about your experience.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this forum. I've never done this before, so this is going to be a bit new. It's a bit new for me. However, yes, it has been difficult. I started out as a residential counselor for a set of people that have total brain injuries in a household setting. It is difficult because they don't get tested. That was the one thing that they did not do for these particular residents. They were not tested at all whatsoever. So it did present a challenge. Not only did it present a challenge, some of us were actually, from what I understood, were tested positive. So they had to go into quarantine, and it made the dynamic that much harder to handle. When they say essential workers, they are a majority of the time they're looking at our doctors, our nurses, our police officers, but they often forget about the rest of us that are out here, your mental health workers, your nurses, aides, the people that are elderly. They really tend to forget that we're out here too. Transportation, because I am taking public transportation, it is difficult to get from one place to another. SEPTA only did pieces, like when they shut down SEPTA, they really shut down SEPTA to only a lifeline service. So it left me to find other ways, creative ways, if I might add, to get from home to work when I had to get to work. And then on top of that, only work part-time. And then as a result of being overworked, I got tired out and I had to make a choice to change jobs because it got a little bit too difficult for me to handle. So it's still difficult. I am still considered an essential worker. Even looking for that different job to help me get to a better place is not easy. It's nowhere near easy because they're not hiring. They say they're hiring. But if you don't have the proper experience, you can't get another job somewhere else. You know, it gets to be that difficult. So like the doctor was saying, with the doctors that are out there doing the testing and all, she's absolutely right. Our mentally challenged folks are not getting tested if they're in a residential facility because they're considered in quarantine. These gentlemen that I had to help out are still in quarantine. They are not allowed to come out of the house. They are not allowed to go outside. They're not allowed to, get that fresh air that they need unless we are all like together in front of the house or in front of, wherever we are at that time. They're not allowed to go to the market. We have to do that on our own. The job that I was with, they did not provide that extra transportation for me, even though we had vans to get us back and forth. They didn't provide that service. So I was left rather stuck. And I'm going through the same issue again with the new job that I have. I had to start over, literally start over. And I have the same issues with the rioting and everything going on now. And SEPTA is, sort of condensed. Right. I'm left trying to find a way to get to work on my own, which incurs more of a cost to me. It's difficult to do that when you're taking care of your daughter. And for me, living with my parents, I had to literally downsize. Right. And it's been difficult. It has been very difficult. But to God be the glory, because it's going to be okay.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So many of the people that we are and have been relying on in this pandemic who are talked about constantly as the essential workers like yourself, who are providing key supports for people who are the most often not thought about, also need the support to be able to take on those roles of being essential workers and to have the transportation support and have the support themselves so that they can also take care of us and take care of the society and keep things moving. So we appreciate everything that you've been doing, and thank you for sharing your own experience of the challenges of being in that position. I want to shift to Munira Edens. Hi, Munira.
Hello.
Hi. You're very welcome. You're an organizer who is, I've been told, passionate about organizing for workers' rights. And you are also a mother of 2 school-age boys. So you have been having to educate your children through this whole thing with the schools closing, and also support them and yourself through all of this, the protesting that's happened around this latest police murder. So I just would love to hear from you about what is it like to be a parent in this moment, with everything that you have to take on in addition to providing for your family.
Sure. First, again, thank you for having me. I first want to say sorry, Jennifer. I really feel for you when I hear your story. I got my CNA license when I was in 2007, so I remember, caring for people was, very important to me. But in the moment, yes, like you said, I'm an organizer for 1PA, and, fighting for housing issues is one thing, because I've, lived through it, I've lived through the struggle. Having 2 teenage boys at 14 and soon to be 16 in 2 weeks has been a struggle, all these years, but I'm proud to be their mother, but in the moment, it was one thing with COVID and trying to transition, working from home and making sure that they are getting the education that they need, turning in the schoolwork that, the teachers are asking them to turn in. So that just was one thing in the moment with COVID. And now with the rioting and the protests and, everything that's happening in our cities right now, is beyond difficult. I don't, right now I can't even wrap my head around everything. It's still difficult just to process things, because it was already difficult. It was already difficult just trying to figure out, making sure he's able to go into the 11th grade next year. That's an important step in life. And then I have a 14-year-old who, should be graduating this year, so they're missing out on a lot of opportunities. And it's just been a long time since I've been in school. So when, transitioning into this, I try to be mindful of other students. I'm glad that I'm not in the same positions that I was in, a few years ago, when I couldn't, I don't think that this would have worked. I never had internet services until a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, I just, oh goodness, I pray for the other mothers,
How has the internet service been now for you in terms of, because you have 2 different children on 2 different, class levels in school and do they have to be on 2 different computers? How has that been?
So I don't know if anybody can tell, but I'm on my phone.
Uh-huh.
And we're on video chat on my phone because I cannot be on Zoom on my computer because of the internet service.
Mm.
It is not, and it's funny because I never realized how bad our internet service was until this moment. So it's real, it's very difficult, I appreciate the schools trying, because we have got a laptop from his school, actually. He goes to Abraham Lincoln High School in the Northeast. So they gave us 1 computer, which again, I have 2 boys. And, they asked us to, if we couldn't, to try to be mindful when we came to get the computers. So I said, okay, I have a laptop at home. I think this should work out, So I only went to go get 1 laptop. And by the time things got in a good rotation, it was like, whoa, we definitely need our own laptop apiece.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely internet service sucks,
It's not enough bandwidth for you to really do what you need to do for both your children.
Right. And then, you want to pay attention, and it's very difficult when teachers don't have the answers either. I want to keep up with what my children are doing. I want to know if they're getting good grades, when they're completing this work or not. I want to be involved, but it's just so difficult, especially, I know I'm fairly young, but I'm not computer savvy. Me and technology do not all the way get along. So it's that's just a challenge in itself.
Yeah.
He knows computers better than me.
Yes. Well, look, we're up on our next break, Munira, but is that your son, Tariq?
Taki.
Oh, Taki. Okay, I'm sorry. I had the spelling wrong in my notes here. Hi. When we come back, if you want to speak to us about what it's been like for you. We'd love to hear from you, Taki, on the other side of this break. You are listening, thank you. You're listening to a special town hall, COVID-19 in the Black community, why Philly needs a Black stimulus. We will be right back.
Hi, this is Councilmember Derek Green. Election Day is Tuesday, June 2nd. Because of COVID-19, you'll probably have a different polling place than normal next Tuesday. Find out where you'll be voting by visiting pollingplaces.philadelphiavotes.com. If you received a mail-in ballot, the Board of Elections must receive your ballot by June 2nd at 8 p.m. Go to philadelphiavotes.com to find out where you can return your ballot on Election Day. Whether in person or by mail, please make sure you vote on June 2nd. Stay safe, Philly.
I'm Karen Dunn, asking for your vote for state representative in the 188th district. Our district needs a world-class education for every child, a living wage for families, and support for a Green New Deal to fight the climate change that we're facing. I was born and raised in the 188th. I'm passionate about what happens to us. Together we'll get this done. I'm Karen Dunn, and I'm asking for your vote. Push number 18 on June 2nd.
The Pennsylvania primary election is today, June 2nd. New Voices for Reproductive Justice wants Black voters to be healthy and safe as you voice your vote during COVID-19. If you did not request an absentee or mail-in ballot, you can still vote in person today. Visit newvoicesrj.org/2020 elections for a list of consolidated polling places in Philadelphia. If you have issues at the polls, please call 1-866-RVOTE. Again, that's 1-866-RVOTE.
Election Day is Tuesday, June 2nd. Because of COVID-19, fewer polling places will be open. You will likely vote at a different place than you are used to. Find out where you will vote on June 2nd by visiting pollingplaces.philadelphiavotes.com.
If you received a mail-in ballot, the Board of Elections must receive the completed ballot by June 2nd, 8 p.m. sharp. Please visit philadelphiavotes.com to find out where you can return your completed ballot on Election Day. Please make sure you vote on June 2nd.
Word TV. We're streaming live video of this conversation right now.
Tune in on YouTube at On Word
or on Facebook at Forward.
Word TV.
Black Talk Media.
Welcome back to Word's special town hall conversation about COVID-19 in the Black community, why Philly needs a Black stimulus. This is Amadi Braxton, your regular host of Solutions on Fridays. And we're really happy that you all are listening in, and we're happy to have an amazing, beautiful panel of folks who are experiencing the pandemic and the crisis, the economic crisis, firsthand, as well as some of our scholars who have done a lot of work analyzing what's happening, and some of our other technical experts, one of whom we will go to in a minute. But first I want to return back to Munira and her son, Taki. Taki, are you available to talk to us about your experience of this as a young person, as a young man? Hi, Taki.
Hello.
So just tell us a little bit about what it's been like for you as a young person in this pandemic situation, and now with all of the protests happening. How are you feeling?
I feel, I don't know, all of this is just terrible to me. Like, well, first, to begin with, like, school and, like, the COVID and, like, that situation, I didn't really like being on the computer for school. Like, I knew it was, like, pretty much the only option, but, like, I did not like it at all. It was, like, I felt like there's more work, there's more pressure, and, like, it's just more, like, complicated. And then, like, me, I'm not good at, like, just focusing on one little thing. It's hard for me to focus on one little thing and just sit there and focus on it for a long time. So for me just to be on the computer for, like, a couple hours, it was, like, hard. And then, yeah, that was just, I didn't like that.
The riots right now, do it affect you? Do you feel any way about the riots?
And the riots, well, the riots, so basically, I feel like most people that are, like, that were going, like, that were taking stuff from the stores and stuff, most of them weren't doing it for, like, of what happened. They're just doing it just for their own benefits and their own gain. And I feel like, I mean, that's better than being silent, but at the same time, I feel like we could have had like an organized riot, and maybe we still could have got something done.
Right.
Because like them doing this, like, is making like a situation for everyone else worse. People have to stay in the house longer now, and it's just, I know everybody been waiting to come outside and being able to do what they want, and now they really can't.
It feels like even more of a setback, kind of.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing your experience. It's really hard to not have the social interaction of your regular school experience, and to have the fear of really being able to like be with your friends and be outside and socialize, not only because of the pandemic, but also because of what's happening out in the streets right now. So thank you for sharing your vantage point on that. I want to shift to Rashida Phillips, who is a longtime housing attorney, and who is also an artist and writer, which I don't think I mentioned before, an Afrofuturist creator. But in your work as an advocate for people who are dealing with housing issues, talk to us about the housing crisis in Philadelphia that even pre-existed the pandemic, and how the pandemic has been impacting that. What are some of the key features of the crisis that existed before? How have they gotten worse since the pandemic crisis? And what are some of the solutions we should be calling for?
Absolutely. Yeah. So you hit it, and Professor Taylor talked about this earlier, but Philly was in an eviction crisis prior to the pandemic, and eviction was one of the leading causes of homelessness and housing instability. Our eviction rate is 4 times higher than a foreclosure rate, and it impacts almost 1 in 14 Philadelphia renters. And, part of that is because, back in 2008, right, we had this foreclosure crisis and predatory lending crisis that primarily targeted Black people, Black homeowners. And so that increased our tenant population. And so now we're about 50-50 in terms of homeowners and renters. And I think, a lot of people, we know that Philadelphia has a significantly high poverty rate, one of the highest in the country of the big cities. And so a lot of people associate, right, the high housing crisis with, as a consequence of our high poverty rate, right? But the story is much more complicated than that. We have a very old housing stock. We do not have a proactive landlord licensing system, just to name a few things. And so we have tens of thousands of Philadelphians who live in substandard housing. And again, this is prior to the pandemic. And so when you look at that, right, the people who are most impacted by this, as always, right, are single mothers, Black mothers in particular, African-American families, seniors, people with disabilities, all of the people in our communities who are vulnerable and who are already disproportionately impacted by poverty. But the thing is, when you look at that number also in terms of, and this holds across the country, this is not significant to Philadelphia, Black women across the country see rates at about 70% eviction rates. They're the people who are most often dragged into eviction court. But the disturbing thing about it is that when you take out income, right, when you take out the fact that people are disproportionately impacted by poverty in the Black community, you still see high rates of eviction in our city. So in areas where people's income is, middle class or even higher income, you still see that African Americans are being evicted and see the highest rates of housing instability, right? And so these forces, and again, Professor highlighted this, but it's a result of the systemic and structural racism. It's these really complex histories, these patterns of discrimination, it's segregation in the job market, it's housing market, it's all of these things that are compounding. And so that's the landscape, right, in which now with the pandemic, where we're saying, right, the only way to really be healthy and to stay safe is to stay at home, right? But we have such a, so many homeless people who don't have the opportunity to stay home, right? They don't have a home to go to. Even in the midst of this, the rioting that's happening, and, in our admonishment of protesters and looters, we're saying, go back home, right? Many people don't have homes to go to. That is the situation that we're dealing with. And so when the pandemic hit, there was already a backlog of 1,700 eviction filings in our court that needed to be rescheduled. We will see when that eviction moratorium lifts in a couple of weeks, we will see hundreds of people running to the courts to file evictions for people who were unable to pay their rent due to being unemployed during the pandemic and not being able to work. So that is the fear. That is what we're going to see. What we're already dealing with, even with the courts not being open, and as a result of the courts not being open, is an increase in illegal evictions as well. So this is what people are dealing with. So not only are our renters who are disproportionately African American, disproportionately women, their children, facing housing instability, they're also facing highest rates of being infected with COVID, right? And so the double whammy of that, and then again, not being able to be safe in their own homes because their homes are on the line or because they don't have stable housing. So this is the kind of space that we're in Philadelphia. In terms of solutions, there are many that need to happen. I think, when we're talking at the structural level, we need to talk about reparations. We need to talk about reparations that speak to the violent, historical, systemic racist legacy of housing exclusion, instability, homelessness that has disproportionately impacted our communities, right? When we're talking about local solutions, let's pass the EHPA, Councilmember Brooks and Gim's legislation where, tenants are able to get the time that they need. Tenants and landlords don't have to face off, right? They can have a process through which they can mediate and come to solutions that work for both sides. We need to have right to counsel. We need to ensure that every tenant who walks into landlord-tenant court come next month has an attorney by their side. Absolutely. Because what we're dealing with here, we don't know, right? If people have to go do their hearings by Zoom, if there's uneven because the capacity of the court is low, they're not getting the notices that they need to be in court, all sorts of, chaos can emerge from that. And so we absolutely need to make sure that people are represented. And, there's lots of other things, but I think those are some of the ones that I would push forward immediately.
Yeah, thank you, Rashida. We are up on our next break just about. And when we come back, I'd like to have Council Member Brooks elaborate a little bit on the points that you were raising, Rashida, because there is, legislation that she has put forth. But there's this larger context of a budget conversation that's happening right now. The mayor has put forth essentially an austerity budget based on the reduced tax revenue that they're anticipating, and it's where does it cut? It cuts in communities that are being most impacted by the pandemic, and it's cutting in places that for many of us don't make sense. So we will return to that conversation after this break. You're listening to a special word town hall on COVID-19 in the Black community, why we need a Black stimulus. We will be right back.
Holistic health information every weekend with Dr. Paul. Saturdays during the Holistic Hour at 9 a.m. and Sundays during the Green Hour at 3 p.m. right here on WURD 96.1 FM and 900 AM.
Streaming live at wordradio.com and on the Word Radio app.
Listen to Laborers Live.
We created the weekend. We created the 40-hour work week. We just want enough to feed our family, be able to send our children to college, and let our next generation do better than we did.
To people that might have forgot how important unionism is in a country like the United States. People now infringing on our 8-hour workday, trying to work people more than 8 hours without overtime, trying to work people without benefits. In the long run, everybody's getting a fat paycheck except the worker. So this is really a wake-up call for America.
The struggle is continuous. Tune in to Laborers Live every Friday from 4 to 5 p.m. Sponsored by LESIT, the Laborers Employers Cooperation Education Trust of the Laborers District Council of Philadelphia and vicinity.
Local 332, Sam Staten Jr. Business Manager. Local 57, Esteban Vera Business Manager. Local 135, Dan Woodall Jr. Business Manager. Local 413, James Harper Jr. Business Manager. The Laborers District Council, Ryan Boyer Business Manager, and Tony Staten, Executive Director of LESIT.
This Black Music Month vignette is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Lottery.
Toni Morrison was an American novelist, essayist, book editor, and college professor who grew up surrounded by music. The influence of her mother's singing, street rhythms, and the Black church are woven throughout her writing. Her most famous books include Song of Solomon, Sula, Jazz, The Bluest Eye, and Beloved. In 1996, she received a Nobel Peace Prize for being a visionary force giving life to an essential aspect of American reality. But Toni Morrison also made a splash in classical music, providing the text for a 6-part song cycle, Honey and Rue, and the opera Margaret Gardner. The opera debuted in 2005 and toured to several cities, including Philadelphia. Word Radio celebrates Toni Morrison for her contributions to Black music and literature.
Ramp up your fun when you play skee ball, the new scratch-off and fast play game from the Pennsylvania Lottery, both with top prizes of 10 grand, as well as second chance drawings. Must be 18 or older. Please play responsibly. Benefits older Pennsylvanians every day.
Home of the Happy Hour. With Sincerely Sarita. This is Word Radio, 96.1 FM and 900 AM WURD Philadelphia.
Streaming live at wordradio.com and on the Word Radio app.
Word TV. We're streaming live video of this conversation right now.
Tune in on YouTube at On Word
or on Facebook at Forward.
Word TV.
Black Talk Media.
Welcome back to Word's special town hall conversation on COVID-19 in the Black community. This is Amadi Braxton, your regular host of Solutions on Fridays from 5 to 7. Very happy to have this wonderful panel with us today to talk about the situation we find ourselves in right now. I want to go back to Council Member at Large Brooks, just to build on what Rashida Phillips was talking about in terms of housing and the kind of, issues with the budget that has been presented by the mayor, because it's essentially an austerity budget, and we actually need an infusion of capital. We need an infusion of money into Black communities right now. What are the key priorities going forward in terms, in the context of these announced cuts? What's your kind of clap back to that in terms of what priorities would you like to see funded, actually?
Since we're talking about, a Black stimulus, right? We need to make sure that we're funding our schools. There's no cut should be made to public education. We see the results of lack of education. A divestment in education means that we have generations of poverty. We see that already. So we cannot afford to cut back on any services that are designed to protect and enhance the lives of our children. So that means the closing of the rec centers, the downsizing of libraries. We can't allow that to happen because the long-term effects will be dire for our communities. And then another thing, some of the cuts were made to the Housing Trust Fund, and we're talking about providing quality, low-income housing for people with disabilities. We're talking about housing for our seniors. And one thing we don't talk about, but the fastest growing homeless population are our senior citizens. Who have already invested into our communities, and they're living on the street. Homelessness is a crisis here in the city. So we cannot afford to divest from housing in the city, and then we're making investments into policing. So one of the things we're pushing for is our Emergency Housing Protection Act, that Rashida had mentioned earlier. And the importance of that is to maintain or make sure that families are allowed to stay in their homes, especially during this pandemic, even post the pandemic, when we're going to see huge economic consequences because of this. On top of the uprisings that are happening right here nationally, we will see Black and brown communities hurting the most. And there's no way we can divest in those things that are most important to, you know, the lives of the most vulnerable people here in our city. You know, we need to make sure that we're investing in the resources that help rebuild what the Black community looks like. Even when the stimulus money came out, we realized that Black barbers and hairdressers that had prior records were not allowed to get any of that money. So we have small business owners that are trying to survive and do the best for their families that are now in situations where they can barely make ends meet. And we still have not opened up. I think barbershops are on the list for after yellow or whatever color scheme you got to be in to go and make some damn money. But we realize that at the same time, people are losing their homes this week. We realize that illegal lockouts in Philly are real. From the time we put the governor put the restriction on evictions, people were still getting evicted. We were getting calls every day. We realized that, you know, a lot of landlords wanted to say we're negotiating with our tenants, the tenants that you choose to negotiate with. You know, the backlash that we heard is that people are getting unemployment. I know people that are still 2 months waiting for unemployment checks, and they were already living check to check, and they already lost multiple jobs trying to feed kids. I can imagine, Munira, with them 2 grown boys in your house, eating you out of house and home. I have children as well. I have a large family, and it's been hard. Then you have to incur an expense around computer access and internet and all of these other things that are happening that are real. You know, and with us being, you know, Philadelphia is a Black city. We need to make sure that we're investing in our communities. We need to make sure that we're investing in our young people. We need to make sure that we're investing in their long-term safety and making sure that we're creating solutions to pull people out of generations of poverty and solutions to help them build generational wealth moving forward. And currently we don't see that. And when we look at this austerity budget that we see, all we see is divestment.
Right, right.
And it's important that not only in the city, that if we don't get a budget that reflects what we need for these Black and brown kids in our city, we have to hold on it. We also need to continue to push at the state to make sure they're funding all of these things we're talking about. We need to make sure that we're putting money back in our schools. We need to make sure that housing programs are covered. We need to be taking care of our folks with disabilities. We need to be taking care of our senior citizens. We need to make sure people are able to live and thrive, not just in Philly. I know we're talking about Philly right now, but this is a national issue. And we're getting ready to move into a huge crisis that we have never seen before. We thought the pandemic was going to set us back. Now we have something else.
Right.
And even we're uprising, we're angry, but my passion is that my people come together and we're going to come up with solutions so we can come out of this stronger and better. You know, we know with every generation, there has been a huge uprising and people are just tired of being lost or left out of conversations, left out of rooms, left off the tables, and not being invested in a strategic way. And this is the time for us to make that happen. And that's why I thought it was important that the people that we pulled together on this call are part of the conversation. I want to thank Dr. Stanford because the investments that they did, so many Black people in our city are dying from COVID-19 because lack of testing not available. These Black doctors stood up in their own time and raised money on their own to make this happen. We need to fund that. That shouldn't be something that they're begging and scraps to make sure that Black people are okay in this city. That's not acceptable. Right. It's not acceptable. We need to make sure these things are happening. And the only way we can do it is to unite and come together across sectors. So we need politicians. We need our activists. We all need to come together and fight for these things because we deserve it. We invested into this city. We work hard. We work damn hard, 2-3 jobs just to be able to survive right now. For people to tell us no. And we can't take no for an answer. We can no longer take no. And I understand the frustration of our young people out in the streets. But it's up to us, us that know better, to reframe with this conversation for negativity that we hear, just reframe it and make it something positive that we can turn around and take back and power and change that frustration and rage into some power to restore our communities. And we can do it. And the people on this call are just the folks to be able to rally up the troops to make sure that moving forward, Black people are getting what they need in the city.
Thank you, Councilmember Brooks, for that. I want to shift to one of the other folks on this call, Professor Kumanika, and I just want to preface his remarks by just adding to what you were saying, that you know, the time to, it's not, when a community is in crisis, that is not the time to disinvest.
Exactly.
You know, when the community is in crisis, that is when you have to pour more resources. And I want to just give a shout out as somebody from, you know, representing, and also I can, you know, maybe speak for Rashida on this, representing arts and culture in the city. That is a part of what is needed now. Young people in particular, but all of us rely on arts and culture to keep us sane and whole in this period of time of crisis. So that should not be on the and recreation, that should not be on the chopping block either, particularly when it comes to our young people. So I want to just shift to Chenjerai Kumanika to talk about, you know, the role of, just give us some of your historical perspective and analysis on the larger context of how policing is working in this moment, because there is a sense of, instead of investing in communities, there is a sense of like managing communities that are struggling under disinvestment through policing. So I'd love you to just share your thoughts about that.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on this call, and I really have learned so much. And I just want to say to everybody who's listening, you know, this is a really trying time. So anybody who may be feeling hope, you know, lack of hope or feeling despair, I just want you to latch on and listen to what all the people on this call have said, but particularly what Kendra has said. This is a time actually of possibility right now. And one of the things that is happening across the country, in Philadelphia and Minneapolis, is that people are asking a basic question: how, in the face of all this suffering, the COVID crisis, and everything we've discussed on this call in housing, health, internet, how do you divest from our community and potentially invest $14 billion into policing? It's a basic question. You know, people, the issue of the police is a complicated one for a lot of people, because we know that we have real harm in our community that has to be prevented. And we are absolutely committed to that. But what's, I think, emerging, especially over the events of the last few days, is the reality that the police often are not a part of helping that harm. They're not put here to protect us. Now that's not about, you know, maybe your friend or your relative who may be an officer. There are some officers who see themselves as trying to help, but their job, the historical function of the police, is not about that. And so I want to give some history, but one thing I want to say, just to make sure this gets in and doesn't get confused, is that Philadelphia, a sister who was working with a campaign that's looking at having a just budget, you know, that really went into the budget and did the analysis, and they found that if we were to cut the Philadelphia Police Department in half, right, we would be able to actually close the revenue gap and add $41 million to our budget. And we know what that money that goes into the police is paying for. You can see, you've seen it on display for the past couple of days. It's not going into helping people, it's going into riot gear, it's going into firing tear gas and rubber bullets. But you know, people believe that the police are here to protect us. And what I'm saying here as a professor at Rutgers University, that is an ahistorical statement, okay? The Philadelphia Police Department starts in 1854. And what we see from that time is, first of all, it starts from a racist premise, right? It starts as a nativist first police chief who immediately announces he will not hire any immigrants. And he was not even talking about Black people. He was talking about the Italians and Irish and those folks who were not yet white. You know, Black folks wasn't allowed to be on it. And this is at a time in Philadelphia before we had the time to vote. And what we see since then is not the police department getting better, but literally every 3 to 4 years, a major corruption scandal, right? Going all the way up to 2019, where with Internal Affairs provided the name of 14 police officers who had 158 complaints, right? and you know, the racist Facebook comments. So the question that I think people are asking, right, when we talk about putting $14 billion, right, while divesting from the community, is this: what other social institution could fail to be reformed for 166 years, and we continue to give it more money, more and more money to oppress and exploit us? And so that's a historical analysis, and I'll stop there. But you know, there's a lot to be said on this issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. There, you know, we're just scratching the surface here on this 90 minutes that we have, and we hope that you know, we can continue the conversation going into the future and go deeper into it, because there's so much to unpack in what each of you is sharing. I want to go to Councilmember Thomas to talk about this from the angle of, you know, I know that you kind of came into office on your passion for supporting young people, and we'd love to hear just your perspective on what young people need support around right now in this moment, in the context of the policing situation and what they're feeling regarding that. We heard a little bit from Taki earlier about what he's observing, but would love to hear from you what you're seeing, and in terms of what a Black stimulus looks like, or where we need to actually invest instead of disinvest. Would love to hear your voice in this.
So thank you, first of all. Thank you for having me. Thank you to all the people who are on the call for all the great work that you do, advocating for communities of color. And of course, thank you to my colleague, Councilmember Brooks, who is just a champion and a soldier for our people. Of course, the WURD station, which does the great work in the world of media and broadcasting. And so to just be on these outlets on a day like today with so much going on, it's an honor to have this conversation. And so with that being said, I really think that right now what's going on is we are witnessing people express their pain, their frustration, their anger, their hurt at what they feel like is a system that just doesn't work. And at the end of the day, I think we all stood together today, and one of the things that was said was, we're not going to ask young people to not express how they feel until we can help provide some light at the end of the tunnel. And what we want to do is we want to say, look, young people, we know you're frustrated. We know you're upset. We know you have rage. We all do. They're not the only ones. You know, when we watch these images and we see some of the things that happens to people of color, me personally, when I go through my own personal negative experiences that we can take a whole radio show to talk about, growing up in the city of Philadelphia and being pulled over by police. I've been pulled over by the police since being winning my council seat. So yes, we have our stories, and you know, anytime you start to talk about them and revisit it, it could be traumatizing. And I think that is what people are living out right now. And so with that being said, you know, I think communities of color need a lot invested in our neighborhoods, in our communities, in our education systems, and in our businesses. And at the end of the day, I appreciate the opportunity not just to have this conversation, because that's not just how I feel, it's how I'm going to continue to advocate and legislate. I appreciate all the other folks who are like-minded, that believe that our community needs more resources, and it's absolutely feasible. It's possible. I know that there's been strong advocacy for the arts. That's a great example of somewhere where maybe we can cut a little bit when you talk to the folks over there, and they can still do that great work. But it's up to us to continue to stand up, to fight for our neighborhoods and our communities, to continue to invest more and more in our schools and our education, in the extracurricular activities, so our young people can stay busy. And the last thing I'll say is, as I close out, I talk a lot about changing the entire infrastructure as it relates to our, not just how we operate as far as how our schools are governed, but also as it relates to the climate, culture, and curriculum in our schools. I personally would love to see us invest much more in technology, civics and government, and things that we know young people will need in order to be extremely successful as it relates to this next generation. And I think right now what we have is a unique opportunity to reinvent not just what happens with neighborhoods and policing, but also reinvent how we look at Black businesses, Black economics, as well as Black education.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Thomas. I would advise against cutting anything from the arts, but we can talk about that offline.
I mean, this is, and you know, again, this is politics.
There's tough choices. There's tough choices that have to be made. I get it.
No, I mean, this is politics, right? And so politics is the process of negotiating. I'm not in the executive branch. I'm in the legislative branch. So if I'm in the executive branch, right, and that's not no hints, I love being in the legislative branch.
Okay.
Then I wouldn't make that decision. But at the end of the day, as we advocate, right, we go to the table with the arts folks and we say, what is it that you need to operate? And when they give us a number, we say, well, we're going to fight for that number. And we're not going to take no for an answer because that's what they say they need to operate. Now, on the advocacy side, look, you don't have to negotiate. You can continue to make your demands day in and day out and say no cuts, no cuts, no cuts, no cuts. And we can agree with you. But at the end of the day, we need those services and those programs. And on this side of things, sometimes we do have to negotiate and we do have to agree to things that we don't necessarily agree with philosophically. And that's a great example. If it were up to me, I wouldn't want to see any cuts to anything that provides services, culture, and activities for youth and young people in Philadelphia. Thank you, and sorry about that. I know I took up.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Yeah, we got to fight from the outside for our highest ideals, and then we have to negotiate. So I get it. I want to shift to Maurice Mitchell, who's the National Director of Working Families Party. And Maurice, I would love to hear from you just a national perspective on what you see right now, and particularly in this political moment. You know, it's primary day here in Pennsylvania. You know, it's almost like a dress rehearsal of the mail-in ballot for November here in this state, but also in many places across the country. What are you, from your vantage point, what do you feel is needed right now in terms of political engagement?
Well, you know, thank you for having me. And I don't want to say good afternoon because based on everything that's happening on our streets, it truly isn't one. But I am honored to join you and to join so many distinguished people, especially Professor Taylor, and of course, Working Families Party Council Member Kendra Brooks, who I'm so grateful for. Now, you've heard from a number of the folks who have spoken before about the multiple intersecting crises Black folks, as well as other people of color, brown folks as well, but Black folks specifically in Philadelphia and across America are facing, right? And I'm so happy that we have a space to talk specifically about Black folks, right? Like there's conversations that we could have about people of color in general, but there are conversations that we uniquely have to have around the Black experience. And it isn't just about the 4 months that we've been experiencing under COVID-19 and its outsized impact on Black communities. It isn't simply about 40 years under the neoliberal era of economics that has pulled all of these resources and redistributed all the wealth that is made on the ground from local communities and redistributed it up to people and corporations and the wealthy. Or simply about the 400 years of slavery and theft that we've endured. It's actually about all three. It's that full context that we're experiencing. You know, and I've heard from folks about the different vision of what this city and country could look like, and one that invests in Black communities instead of suppressing them, and one in which Black lives truly matter. And it isn't just about the state violence that we feel from the police, although that's a piece of it. State violence is everywhere, not just when we interact with the police, but when we interact with public services, when Black folks don't have the ability to have a robust public health system, because that leads to Black death, as we've seen with the COVID-19 crisis. So Black death at the hands of COVID-19 that could have been prevented, or Black death at the hands of police, that's still death and mourning in our communities. And so I want to talk briefly about how we could actually get to a place where we invest in Black lives. And it's not simply about Black people living, it's about Black people thriving, right? We're not simply satisfied, right, with the conditions that we're in without the police killing us, right? We desire more. We want to thrive just like every other community. Just like white people in suburban communities, their ability to thrive, we want that same thing. And if we live in a democracy, then we should get everything that every other community, every other citizen desires, right? So I want to talk briefly about how we get there. So now I say this as a leader of a national political party and political movement. Voting is necessary, but not sufficient to make the change we seek. We need people to build electoral power by voting up and down the ballot, just like we did last cycle to elect Kendra Brooks to be an independent Black voice on the city council. And we need to build movement power through organizing, through demonstrations and protests. So all of that is democracy. Democracy isn't just voting.
Right.
Voting is essential, but we need to ensure that our folks are on the streets, our votes are organizing day in, day out. And voters in Philadelphia have power. And one of the ways that we know that voters in Philadelphia have power and that Black people have power is the amount of resources that they're using to suppress our vote. So on the local level, you have the power to elect those closest to your pain. Working class folks and movement leaders who are responsive and accountable to communities, like Kendra. More of them are running in every cycle than ever, all around the country. Kendra Brooks and the revolution that we started in Philly is just an example of what's happening all across the country. So, and that makes a difference in real people's lives, as is evidenced by the difference it makes by simply just having Kendra speak there and speak the people's will from city council. But district attorneys, right, state representatives, this matters, and we have a role to play. And militarized police departments don't operate unless mayors and city councils continue to co-sign these the lack of accountability and these budgets. On the national level, Pennsylvania is a swing state. Trump won the state of Pennsylvania and the presidency with just 44,000 votes. If the people in Philadelphia who voted for Kendra Brooks and the Working Families Party come out again in November, Trump will lose in Pennsylvania. And so the future of this country is in the hands of the voters of Philadelphia. But just as our struggle didn't start 4 months ago, or 4 years ago when Trump got into office, or 4 decades ago, it won't be resolved by one election or one election cycle. So absolutely, we need to go out and vote. We need to get all of these unaccountable elected officials from president all the way down out of here. And we need to elect accountable people. But we have to be clear, it won't be resolved by one election or election cycle. The fight for a more just and equitable world covers centuries. The struggle for Black freedom spans generations. And this work is our inheritance. And the election this year provided an opportunity to carry that struggle just a little bit further. Thank you.
Thank you for giving that perspective. It is not just being in the streets, but it is also, and organizing. I mean, that is a part of it, but there's also the essential voting, active voting, and putting our local elections in the context of the importance of this state to the national elections coming up in November as well. Thank you. We are up on our final break for this program. You are listening to a special town hall on COVID-19 in the Black community. And I am Amadi Braxton, your host. We will be right back after these messages.
The game is about to start. Get your face out your phone.
Just a minute. I'm completing the 2020 census.
Why do you care?
Listen, the census will impact how and where public funds will flow in our communities each year. If we're counted, we'll get better funding for our schools, even affordable housing.
Wow. Well, I'm going to complete the census now.
All right, then. Let's take a shot.
Complete the census online, by phone, or by mail. Shape your future. Start here at 2020census.gov. Paid for by U.S. Census Bureau.
1 in 23 will be diagnosed with colorectal cancer in their lifetime, yet more than 60% of deaths from colorectal cancer could be avoided with preventative screening. A colonoscopy can save your life. Skip the pre-visit and schedule your screening directly at einstein.edu/colon. Colon cancer is preventable. Learn more at einstein.edu/colon.
Election Day is Tuesday, June 2nd. Because of COVID-19, fewer polling places will be open. You will likely vote at a different place than you are used to. Find out where you will vote on June 2nd by visiting pollingplaces.philadelphiavotes.com.
If you received a mail-in ballot, the Board of Elections must receive the completed ballot by June 2nd, 8 p.m. sharp. Please visit philadelphiavotes.com to find out where you can return your completed ballot on Election Day. Please make sure you vote on June 2nd.
Word TV. We're streaming live video of this conversation right now.
Tune in on YouTube at On Word
or on Facebook at Forward.
Word TV.
Black Talk Media.
Welcome back to our special town hall conversation, COVID-19 in the Black community, why Philly needs a Black stimulus. I want to invite our callers. We actually have a little bit more time than we expected, and I'd love to invite callers to join the conversation at this point. You can dial in at 215-634-8065 or 1-866-361-0900. We've covered a lot of territory so far in the conversation, from what's happening on the health front to the uprisings and protests that are happening now around the killing of George Floyd in particular, but of course the historic problem with policing Black communities in our country and in our community here in Philadelphia. And so we'd love to hear from you as the listeners, what you've been thinking about as you've been listening to our great panel, and what you're experiencing right now, what is happening in your neighborhood. I think I started off the show by talking about me hearing the sounds of looting in my neighborhood, and lots of constant sirens all night, the last few nights, loud booms, gunshots, sounds that are not typical at that consistency in my neighborhood. I'll put it that way. We still have some of our esteemed panelists on the line to reflect back and answer your questions. So I want to just return back to you, Councilmember Brooks, in terms of what Maurice was talking about right before the break, in terms of the different levels of engagement that we need at this time. It's not just, yes, today is Election Day, critically important that people exercise their vote. Of course, there are challenges around that because this is our first time doing a mail-in ballot. The law was passed in such a way that it basically required up until yesterday when the governor provided a sort of extension, it required not a postmark on it, but it required you to actually have the ballot in by 8 o'clock today on Election Day, although that has been extended until June 9th. But it is also about engaging in the other political work of organizing and being a part of something larger than an individual action, and advocating and fighting for what we need. So can you talk a little bit about the different levels of engagement that we need at this time?
Yeah, so, I want to start just a reminder that I entered this work as an organizer. I entered this work fighting for schools, for housing, for economic justice, environmental justice. So, that's the reminder of the levels of work that people can get involved. When I fought for my kids' school, I never envisioned that currently I'll be sitting here as a council member. Never had interest into legislation and policy. My focus was getting the things that I felt that my community deserved. So when we're talking about levels of action and levels of involvement, I'm reminded to let everyone know that we all have a sense of responsibility. It's more to voting than just going to press the button. It's important that you're voting for people that support the issues that are most important to you on every level. And I think, I want people to be reminded, those who voted for me and those who didn't, but mostly those that voted for me, that took those long days out in the streets, knocking doors, and explaining a process that no one ever had to explain before. And that's called political education. And it's important. We're talking about my council member talks about civic engagement so much for young people, but I also want to talk about the lack of civic engagement that we didn't receive as a generation. That still is required in order for us to see the real changes that we need to see for our kids. You know, so we have to get involved, and get involved at whatever level you can. You know, the committee people are people that go out and talk about elections and making sure people know how to vote. We all have that responsibility to ourselves, to our children, and to our communities to understand how these processes work. You know, a lot of folks say, I don't vote because it doesn't mean anything. One of the things I said on the campaign trail, if I win this election, it's a proof that every vote counts. Now I won, and now I'm here. And I need you guys to continue to push and make every vote count. I'm talking about every vote that I have to push or take in city council, whether it's around housing, whether it's around emergency sick leave that I'm trying to push as well, whether we're talking about hearings on rent control, whether we're talking about funding for public education, or whether we're talking about not giving the police $15 million. These are things that everyone has to get involved with, because guess what? It affects us. It affects ourselves. It affects our loved ones. It affects our spouses. It affects our children. And this is the time that we look at these uprisings and we may shed tears. I shed many tears just today. But I shed the tears because I know that we have the power to change what we currently see. And I know the only way we can do it is that we have to get involved. These people already showed us that they are not going to stand up for us. They already showed us that we are second-class citizens in a country that we built. And our ancestors sacrificed their lives for some folks to be really, really rich, and for us to continue to go deeper and deeper in poverty. And the only way we can break that cycle is to get involved in the process. However you can, whether it's schools, whether it's environmental issues, whether it's policing, whether it's voting, we have to take charge of our communities. That's how we're going to take back our wealth. That's how we're going to build up the next generation of fighters. And that's how we're going to create a Black stimulus for our communities. No one is giving us a damn thing. We have to come together and fight. You know, uprisings are one thing, but the real fight is, what are you going to do when it's time to rebuild our city? What are we going to do when we need to build accumulative wealth and buy back our communities? We have to be in charge and empowered to do so. And this is the time. And each and every one of us, whether you're on a phone, whether you're watching this on live stream, or whatever you're doing, we have to empower each other to take it back. And that's the time we're in right now.
Yeah. Thank you. That is a rallying cry right there. We have a couple callers on the line who have questions or comments. Let's go to Bernice in Glenside.
Yes, good afternoon. Listen, I'd like to focus on education for our children. You know, our kids attend schools in the city that are 100 years old. The buildings are so old, dilapidated, and everything, you know, and we deserve better than that from this country. You know, we did build this country, and, you know, we put our sweat and tears in here, and we don't have decent education for our children.
Yes.
You know, we don't have music programs. We don't have physical education programs. You know what I'm saying here? And it's sad. I'm 70 years old. I attended public school. It's gotten worse.
Yes, it has. Not enough investment.
No. I agree. Not enough investment. And, you know, they do the census. And what good does the census do? They're supposed to give out money to different cities for different things that are needed. We don't get it. I don't see it. I just don't see it.
Well, thank you, Bernice. I want to get Munira to comment on this as a parent of school-age children right now, but also to say that I think doing the census is important, but that's a separate issue. Munira, what are your thoughts?
It's funny because that's exactly what I was going to say.
Okay. Say it again. You can say it again.
I think Kendra said it earlier when she said You know, if she won the election, then that's how she know that every vote counts. I've been in organizing for a long time, or an activist, as you know, some would call us, and we don't always do things right. You know, nobody is perfect, but the important part is that we continue to fight. Yes, our children, you know, their education suffers, you know, but I remember the day fighting to get rid of the School Reform Commission. And I remember when we won. You know, I remember how powerful that felt. And I remember how it pushed me to continue to fight for my children. And this is one of the reasons that I'm an organizer, is because our children suffer the most. You know, the things that they need to be educated about, yes, school is important. We want them to get that diploma, you know, but what are they being educated about? You know, we're going through so much out here, and is it a distraction? Because this is election day. Are we talking about what we need to be talking about? You know what I mean? So it's like, if you want to see those things change, number one, don't give up. And number two, be patient. You know, be patient for that change, because, you know, I have great hopes that we are not giving up on our children. And that's where it starts. And that's how we're going to, you know, make people like, I'm sorry, I'm bad with names, but that last caller, we're going to make them see that change. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it, you know, that's why I'm an organizer. And for people who, you know, don't organize or don't think they organize, I think it's a somewhat of an organizer in all of us, and that we need to stand up for our children and just continue to do that. There are definitely changes being made, and it's because of things that, you know, we do as a team.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Lottie, can I add something real quick?
Yeah, as somebody who started off as an organizer around schools. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, one of the things I also wanted to challenge us with is, you know, when I talked about those baby steps to figure out how we can get involved, I'm challenging everyone to know every elected official in your district, because that's how we make change. We're fighting for money right now at the state level. But if you can't pick up the phone and call your state legislator and tell them, I need for you to continue to fight for that money in you know, in Harrisburg, or our state senators, I need you to fight for this money on every level, we're leaving stuff on the table. It's not time to leave anything on the table. So I'm challenging everyone. The smallest thing you can do is know the elected officials that are assigned or elected to cover your area, your district, and call on them for the things that we need. Our schools need money. And there's a lot of money in this country to make sure that our kids are educated properly. We got to fight for it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, you know, you have talked about, just on this call, there's 4 different things that we should be calling city councilors about right now. The Emergency Housing Protection Act, supporting the emergency sick leave, supporting rent control, supporting, in terms of the budget that has been proposed, not giving the police department an additional $15 million. I mean, those are concrete things that people should be calling on their electeds to do right now. Let's go to Woody in Winfield.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. And I think you're having a very interesting conversation here, and I think it's very well needed. I get a chance sometimes to share information pertaining to educational discrimination. Now, nobody usually talks about that, but I know a lot of the kids that grew up when I grew up, basically that were bussed out. Those kids got a much better education than the kids that stayed in the neighborhoods. Now, we've been discriminated against as black people, or should I say the children of the former slaves living in America today. Many of us have graduated these schools with diplomas as receipts for educational services never truly rendered. And I think that has to be addressed, but not just by you. We're talking about this country. Today, if you go and read the Philadelphia Tribune, I did an article pertaining to America needs to be re-educated about chattel slavery, because that's where the problem started. And the trauma of 400 years of not being told to read and not being allowed, and the laws telling you that it's wrong, you can't do this. It is extended even into after we were freed in 1865. So that trauma is still with us today. We have to do something to share with the country, America, that if you really truly want to make a change, and all those people who are down there rioting, if you really want to truly make a change, let's examine slavery. Let's have an office for the descendants of the slaves, the chattel slaves in this country, in cities, inner cities all over this country. We're number one in poverty, so that makes us directly connected to not being educated properly. So I'd like, hopefully, for someone to answer or at least review and check out educational discrimination and see just where it started and how much of it we really have and the damages of it cause trauma and everything else for the rest of somebody's life. This disease will continue to exist from the parents to the children, so forth and so on. So please, if you do nothing else, educational discrimination is real.
Yeah. Chandra, did you still want to jump in?
Well, one thing I just wanted to say quickly on the, I absolutely agree with the brother's comments on educational discrimination. And I think that, again, I just want to bring some of that educational discrimination back into our budgetary conversation, right? Because, there's a way in which a budget can discriminate against the Black community. When we talk about this money that our schools need, when we talk about this money that we need in all these areas, we are sometimes told that that money doesn't exist. But the truth is that money is being, you can look in the budget, right? And we can provide the resources if you're interested and see how that money is going to the wealthiest people in the city of Philadelphia, in the state of Pennsylvania. People like the people who run Comcast, who won't give us Wi-Fi for our children to get online. People like, some of the universities who are not paying taxes are the wealthiest, biggest landowners, but don't pay taxes. We could just take small portions of that tax revenue that they should be paying us and put that into our schools. So I think we need, as Black people, when we talk about a Black stimulus, we need to get clear. There are very wealthy people in this community who are not suffering. They're not suffering the way that we are. And yet they are holding our budget and our children's education hostage. And that's a form of structural educational discrimination against Black people. I just wanted to bring that up. And that's why we got to get involved.
Absolutely. Before we continue this conversation, we're going to go to a quick break. And on the other side, we will pick up where we left off. You're listening to a special town hall conversation on COVID-19 in the Black community. This is your host, Amadi Braxton. We'll be right back.
If you want to start your morning with mindfulness, motivation, and inspiration, tune in to Daybreak with me, Helana, here on WURD Radio, Monday through Friday from 6 to 7 a.m. I'm a health and wellness coach with over 15 years experience helping people to transform their lives. On the show, we talk health and wellness 360, from getting your mind right to getting your money right. So let's rise and shine together right here on WURDradio.com, 96.1 FM, 900 on your AM dial on Daybreak every morning.
Want the latest in Word swag?
Check out the shop tab on wordradio.com. Hoodies, tees, and more in a variety of colors. The shop tab on wordradio.com. Show the world that you're all about Black.
Talk Media.
The Pennsylvania primary election is today, June 2nd. New Voices for Reproductive Justice wants Black voters to be healthy and safe as you voice your vote during COVID-19. If you did not request an absentee or mail-in ballot, you can still vote in person today. Visit newvoicesrj.org/2020 elections for a list of consolidated polling places in Philadelphia. If you have issues at the polls, please call 1-866-RVOTE. Again, that's 1-866-RVOTE.
Now is the time to support independent Black media.
It's early bird season.
And that means it's time for the Forward Early Bird Showdown. Start or renew your membership between now and June 5th and receive our special early bird rate of just $75. But also, in the spirit of friendly competition, we're having our Early Bird Showdown. When you start or renew your Forward membership, enter the code for your favorite WURD show. The show with the most entries will get special swag added to the Word store. Maybe it's a Wake Up with Word t-shirt, or a Source hat,
or a happy hour mug, or a reality check notebook, or a Tonight on Word backpack.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Relax.
All right, I'll bring it down. Anyway,
you have the power to decide. Listen to your favorite show daily for the show codes, and be sure to enter the code at checkout. Remember, your support is what keeps WURD going. For more information or to start or renew your membership,
Visit WURDradio.com/FORWURD
or call us at 215-425-7875.
My name is Rick Krajewski. I'm a community organizer, and I'm running to be your state representative in the 188th District in West and Southwest Philadelphia. I'm fighting for fully funding our public schools, raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, ending mass incarceration, and prioritizing affordable housing. Your well-being is my priority. On June 2nd, push number 17 for Rick Krajewski as state representative in the 188th District.
Word TV. We're streaming live video of this conversation right now.
tune in on YouTube at On Word
or on Facebook at Forward.
Word TV.
Black Talk Media.
This is Amani Braxton, host of Solutions on Word every Friday from 5 to 7. Today, hosting a special Word Town Hall conversation, COVID-19 and the Black community, why Philly needs a Black stimulus. And we have been talking about a range of issues, but we have been talking about the need for investment, not disinvestment right now, which the mayor's budget is calling for disinvestment. And even though, yes, we know we lost a lot of tax revenue in the last 4 months, this is not the time to cut. This is not the time to pull back resources from communities that are already hurting and that are being most impacted in health outcomes and mortality by this pandemic, and are being most impacted right now by the protests that are happening and some of the destruction that is happening as a part of that process in our neighborhoods. I was speaking to my cousin Jamal, shout out to Jamal, earlier today, and he said all 3 pharmacies in his neighborhood have been set on fire. And those are some essential services and businesses that are needed in these communities. So I want to go to, we have a couple callers on the line. We have Maurice in North Philly. Maurice.
Hello, ladies. How's everyone?
Doing great. How are you?
I didn't catch the brother who was just speaking on education and funding.
Professor Kumanika.
Say the name again?
Professor Kumanika?
Oh, well, he's 100%
Anjurai
correct.
Kumanika.
Yeah, he's 100% correct. My organization, Renaissance Action National Network, had met with the school district about 2 years ago on youth projects in the city, and the projects would be free. We had the backing of some city council personnel, councilmatic people that was helping us and supporting us, also attend the meeting. And what we learned at the meeting was the Black kids in the Black community, especially in North Philadelphia, was being profited off of by developers and people who didn't have the best interest of the Black community. And then we also found that we had Black people were supporting that nonsense, so they was practicing white supremacy also. So by us trying to partnership with the school district and the Department of Recreation, because if you look at what's going on in the Department of Recreation also, they taking the courts down now because of the coronavirus. But in Port Richmond and South Philly, in the white neighborhoods, they was taking the courts down before the virus 2 or 3 years ago to stop the Black kids from playing in the playground, in their playgrounds, which the kids had moved to that community. So we look at what's going on in the city. Not only do we need funding, but we need the correct people that understand how to organize. In our organization, if we put a program together, we can get 5,000 kids in no time. No time, we can get 5,000 kids to participate in what we're doing. But the key is when you kind of partnership with city entities, as the school district, Department of Recreation, you get backlash because you doing it the right way, they have another agenda. They have vendors, everyone is profiting off the Black community, especially the Black kids. Down in elementary and middle schools, you have the National Basketball Associations down there now. They trying to profit off the Black kids. The NBA. So this is the continuation legacy of slavery, like the brother said, chattel slavery, with how can we profit off these kids? That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Maurice. Appreciate that. Anybody want to comment on that? I mean, my initial response is that the things have to be directed by us. This is about self-governance. So if we want to make partnerships with different entities for the benefit of our youth, then that is our choice. But nobody should be brokering that on behalf of us for other ends, for other goals that are outside of the goals of our communities.
Marty, I also want to say that when we start this conversation about, you know, the haves and the have-nots, this is not a black or white thing. We already know, like, historically, black folks have also exploited other black folks. Mm-hmm. Like, that's a real thing, you know, and that's a whole nother long conversation. We don't have to go down that, but we have to remember that when we're talking about access to contracts that support black folks and black community, we need to make sure that black folks are getting their fair share. You know, a lot of my colleagues, I think last week, were really going really hard that the mayor extended the contract with PIDC and didn't even extend or offer a contract to the Black Doctors COVID Consortium around testing or contact tracing. So, like, we realize that this is a real issue in our city, and this is the part of the conversation where I keep saying we have to get involved. We can't complain. We have to get involved. You have to know who are the elected officials that have the power to make the decisions and call them on it. Not just call them on it, call them out on it. And that's your responsibility as a voter and as a citizen in the city. And that's real. Yeah. And when I'm talking about calling them out, I'm not just talking about white folks that need to be called out. There's a whole bunch of black folks that need to be called out. And we have to not be fearful, because if we're really talking about improving these communities for our own and for the benefit of all black people, we have to be bold and take those stances.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Brooks, for that. I have more to say on this topic, but we're running out of time, and we have one more caller I want to get to, and that is Jacob in Olney.
Hey, peace be unto you, Sister Braxton, and to your guest there.
Thank you. Peace be unto you.
Yeah, I've been listening. A lot of truths been told. You know, the fact that we built this country as black people, and I was surprised to hear with as many black elected officials that we have on city council, the president being black, that the black doctors didn't get any of that money. You know, we're gonna have, and the day we're voting, right? Mm-hmm. Mary Mason said what we should learn how to do is keep a scorecard. And if you're a black politician that's sent up there by your community, it ain't enough to just go and mingle with the white boys up there. We sent you up there like a Dave Richardson to go get our piece of the pie. And if you don't do that, then you're not representing us. We're not begging for anything. Again, I go back to we built this. Politics is local. We got to learn how this thing works, and we got to start, like you just said, holding their feet to the fire, because we elected you. We sent you there to represent us, and we just don't want you reared back in them big leather chairs like you important, right? And you don't, when you're among them, we don't hear a peep out of you. We want you to get some of that Dave Richardson spirit and go up there and represent your people. If not, voting time will come again and again, and if we got our scorecards right, we'll get the right people in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Appreciate you. We have just about 1 minute left before we have to wrap. I want to just offer Councilmember Brooks as one of the key people organizing this, if you want to have any closing thoughts.
Yes, thank you so much, Amadi. I just want to thank everyone for being a part of the conversation. And I just want to say, like, my heart has been so heavy over these past few days. I'm worried about my community, but after this conversation, I do have some hope. You know, I'm hopeful that because people are committed to pushing back against the status quo and asking for real change. I'm hopeful because people are engaged and paying attention, and that's going to be important in moving forward. I'm hopeful that we can continue to talk about this Black stimulus and what does it mean for us. And for folks that want to stay in touch, I want them to be able to reach out. I mentioned it early. Our petition that we need you to sign is bit.ly/Black stimulus, and it's online. and realize that this is heavy right now. This moment is heavy and difficult, but I want to assure people that our city leaders are listening and pay attention. And breaking down, white supremacy is not easy. This was built way before any of us were on this line. We're here, and it's going to take years for us to continue to break it down. But, we are stronger, and we're committing ourselves to the fight, for our communities. And that's our first step. And although my council colleagues aren't on this line, I just want to ensure, I'm, not a politician. Like, I do have this job, but I'm still for my folks. And I wanted you guys to know that my council colleagues have been fighting hard about creating some of these things. We don't always agree on everything, but some of the decisions that were made outside of our ability at our level as city council members. But they're willing to pull up the fight for the investment into the Black doctors, fight for Black investments in the Black community. And guess what? When they don't, I'm going to say, I need you to call folks and get them to move on things that are important, like the emergency housing bill that I'm trying to pass on Friday, like paid sick time that we're trying to get moving next. There are things that are happening, but I need you guys to be paying attention and connected. And I want to thank 215 People's Alliance. I want to thank WURD. I want to thank the Philadelphia City Council for making this event possible. And last but not least, thank you so much, Amadi, for being such an amazing host and agreeing to take this leap of faith with me. Because when we planned this, I didn't know what this was going to be. I didn't know what it was going to look like, but I knew I wanted to have a moderator that has my same passion and understands, where I'm coming from with all this. So thank you so much. And thank you for all the guests. I love you all. These are my folks in the fight. And we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, thank you. It heartens me, and I know it will hearten many of the listeners to know that all of you who have been on this panel are helping provide leadership right now in all of the areas: housing, workers' rights, education, giving us the analysis and the historical context and supporting grassroots movement. All of that, we really appreciate it, and we really appreciate you all taking the time out to be a part of this conversation today. You have been listening to a special town hall on COVID-19 in the Black community. This is just the beginning of the conversation, everyone. I hope to see you all and hear you all on Solutions this Friday. Every Friday, 5 to 7 p.m. You'll find me there along with my co-host, Bishop Dwayne Royster. Thank you for listening. Peace.